Hey folks, so I got some elderberry cuttings from a local elderberry farmer around here. These are all the Adams cultivar, and we're going to get some elderberry cuttings planted. I meant to do this last year, but I just did not have a spot to put them. So I put them in some of the pots that we put our trees in, and man, they grow so fast. So their roots went crazy, and I just couldn't keep up with them. But we got an area knocked down out here by the willows. So all I did was I just took the mower and just mulched down the tops on most of there's another bluebird. Just landed over there on the fence. I gotta go ahead and put out the rest of their houses. So we are gonna put them all in here. We just knocked down all the standing stuff we left over the winter with as gentle as I could, so that if there is, well, there obviously will be bugs overwintering in the stems. And I didn't want to completely mulch them. So for the most part, I just used that to kind of like knock them down. And yeah, of course, some got shredded. Like there's no way they didn't. But I know that their offspring and them will super appreciate elderberries too. So kind of a trade-off. We still have tons everywhere else. So, all right. So with elderberries, you want to get them in early in the spring, because as you can see here, they are already budding out. And it is, Today is February 11th. I had to stop my phone there in case there's a little glitch to double check the date. I actually didn't know what it was. But they really start to leaf out, like that's active leaves. So they will really bud out very, very soon into the year. So all you need to get them started is you need at least 2 nodes on the stem. And this one's got kind of a big gap between nodes. But all you need is 2 sets of nodes. So they're opposite. Oh my gosh, dropping everything everywhere. Sorry. So they're opposite, the buds on opposite sides, versus alternate, which would be 1 bud here, 1 bud here, 1 bud here, right? So they come up on opposite sides. And so that's a pair of buds, and then that's a pair of buds, right? So you need at least 2 bud junctions on each cutting. And we're going to bury down this whole bud junction. There needs to be at least 1 bud junction onto the ground, preferably 2. So if you get cuttings with 3, but this cultivar has some really long internode space, so space between the bud nodes, right? So we're going to stab these into the ground up as close as we can get to here. And then what's going to happen is those 2 at the top will continue to leaf out, and they'll send up nice tall growth. And then these 2 down here will form into roots. And your roots are really only going to grow around those. It's not like willow that will just send off roots all over the stem. They really only send out roots at these nodes. So we want to make sure that we have at least 2 nodes below ground. But then that's really it. Honestly, you don't have to coat them in auxin. You don't really have to do anything. Literally just stab these in the ground in early spring, and you're good to go. Just wait for them to grow. I will be putting some mulch around the base of these once we finish cutting all of our coppice and pollard trees and getting those mulched up. So I'm going to do 2 rows out here. I don't know why that is not zooming out. 2 rows. We'll go about 8 foot off the willows, because these will really bush out wide, and so will the willows. So those will go at least 2 foot out, 2 foot out, if not 3. And then so we'll only have like 3 foot or so between them to try to get throughout the season and try to maintain them and pull weeds and mow and whatnot right between them. And then so we'll do about 2 foot, and this is a little closer than would be standard, okay? I'm going to do them about 2 foot apart in row. No. We have 30 cuttings. We're going to do them 4 foot between plants in row, and I think the recommended is like 6 or 8. And then we're going to go about 8 foot between rows, and they recommend typically around 10 foot between rows. But I don't mind them being a little bit denser together. Especially since they're the same cultivar. And I just need enough space that while everything is growing, I can run the mower. That's it. I only want enough space to run the mower between them. Beyond that, the tighter I can do them while they'll still grow and be as vigorous as possible, the better. If I thought I could cram them all into one and them still do great, I would. But these are going to spread. They'll bring up new stems every year that really fill in the space. So I want to make sure that we have plenty of space for these guys to grow. So I'm going to go ahead and get those planted. So while we're getting these planted and into the ground, I thought I'd talk about why we're getting them planted, because I know I don't really touch on that in any of the other spots that I stop and talk about this. So we're going to be using elderberries for an insane number of different uses on the farm, right? Like they're we're not growing these to sell. If you did, you'd probably space them a bit more than what I wind up doing in here, but I'll touch on that in a few. Really, what we're after with these is just for our home use, right? This is only, it winds up being 3 rows is what I wind up putting in here, and the rows are about 60 foot long. So I expect to get a decent amount of elderberries out of this, but I'm not going to get enough to sell. Not in any sufficient quantity that's going to make that matter. What we're getting them for and growing them for is because elderberries are awesome for cold relief in the winter as prevention. They're awesome to just include in a lot of the different culinary things we do. So like I thoroughly expect to start including, which these should produce berries either this year or next once they get that root established. So we're going to start including it in, I like to do home brewing, so I'll include it in some of my home brewed beers, some of my home brewed ciders and meads. I'll probably start including it in some of my cured meats. So like, I really like using juniper berries in my bacon, but what about using elderberries? You know, like I like finding ways that I can include native fruits and berries and nuts and wood and things like that into what we eat and cook in our house. One, because it creates awesome wildlife habitat outside, right? Like these are native flowers, a massive amount of native flowers that the native pollinating bees really, really like. Like honeybees don't do a great job of pollinating these because the flowers are so tiny, but the native bees go crazy for these, which is, you know, if you've seen any of my other stuff, you know that that's what I'm all about, is creating that native wildlife habitat. So I get to do that. And then on top of that, provide something that is an amazing antioxidant and has some antibacterial and antiviral properties into our food, right? So that is long-term the goal with this, is just create more diverse and healthy food that we can cook with that is local and native. I love that so much. So hopefully that'll make for some more. Well, really, I guess the easiest way to think of this would be terroir, right? Like because we can always copy recipes, and especially with technology nowadays, we can copy recipes from all over the world because we can recreate the climatic conditions and the spice mixes and everything that you find anywhere in the world. Like if you want to create this very special type of ham from southern Italy, you can do that. You want to create this very special cured sausage from Scandinavia, like you can do that because we can recreate those climates and just order in those spices. But you know, we haven't been doing any of this cured meat stuff, cured like pork, in North America for more than a couple hundred years, right? Like that just hasn't been around. There weren't pigs before we brought pigs here. There were other, you know, peccaries and things like that, but they weren't really cured. So that curing tradition built around terroir hasn't really been built here, with the exception of, you know, cured and smoked fish, right? There's a vast history of cured and smoked fish in native culture here, but not cured pork. So being able to build on that and use our native ingredients to cure and brew and ferment with is something that I'm super excited about, and I love including in our home culinary practice. And the fact that it's healthier for you just kind of like throws a big cherry on top, or I guess an elderberry on top. But for those of you that are trying to raise them to sell, you will still get a decent amount out of this. And back when we did sell stuff to restaurants, we were selling the flowers for like $4 an ounce, which really is only like 2 or 3 flower clusters. And these kick out an insane number of flower clusters. So if you were wanting to sell them, keep in mind, you really could, and you could sell those flowers, you could sell the berries, and on top of that, if you want, every year you can cut these stems back and sell cuttings. And from each cluster of plants, you'll get multiple cuttings that you can sell. So it's the same with the willows and all of that. Like each stem is worth $10-15 easy, and you'll get multiple stems per plant. So keep that in mind. But that's why we're planting these and why we're putting in really so many of them in our permaculture garden here. All right, that's it. So all you gotta do is stab them in the ground. I'm gonna mulch them to help keep the weeds down around them, but those bottom nodes will root, and then the top nodes will send off leaves. And to be honest, a lot of times what will happen is if those bottom nodes aren't buried too deep, like with these, they're not going to be. So those guys, the bottom ones, will shoot out the roots, and they'll also send up 2 extra stems that will go up to 6 inches to a foot of dirt and mulch and wind up coming out too to add more stems to the cluster. So this first season, these guys will go crazy, and then you can cut them every year and either sell the cuttings or replant cuttings. One thing I love about any plants that propagate by cuttings is that if you have one that doesn't make it, you just take cuttings from one that did and stab it back in the spot where the other one didn't make it, unless it's obviously a disease thing or something. But if it was just, you know, that cutting wasn't big enough or whatever, because that happens, or just, you know, something ate it that season and it died, like, you can just refill the holes in. So what we do with the willows, when, you know, we get 1 or 2 that just didn't really thrive and never wind up making it, but their neighbor did, we just take cuttings from the neighbor when we're doing all of our cuttings and just stab it in that spot and fill in the blanks after that first year. That first year is when you're really going to worry about that. After year 2 or 3, it's not really an issue anymore. But yeah, there we go. That's it. I went ahead and planted them closer because I just didn't have enough space here, and we've got some goji berries coming. So we want that last section there to save for goji berries. We wound up doing 6 foot away from the willows, and then we ended up doing 3 rows here staggered. So 2 rows that are evenly spaced across from each other, and then a 3rd row in the middle that is staggered from those. And those are 3 foot apart from each other with 4 foot apart in row. And then they've got that angle. So, all right. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, Raymond and Ashley Hunter. Your guys' support is seriously awesome and super appreciated. And thank you to all of you that make it to the end of our videos. I hope you guys get worthwhile content out of this, and I hope you guys get some elderberries planted. Have a nice week and enjoy this warm weather we've got.